So what is law? Well, for the purposes of this class, it's basically anything that is enforced. And as you'll learn as we go through this class, a lot of times laws can be pretty fuzzy. So even though it's enforced doesn't mean it's clear-cut as to what's right and what's wrong. And where do these laws come from? Well, they come from 6 different sources, and you can see them there on your screen. And we're going to look at each one of these 6 sources of law a little bit closer. So first of all, constitutional law. This is the supreme law. This is nothing, no one can make a law against our Constitution. But wait a second, yes they can. They can until they get caught. And we see them get caught when we see it go to the Supreme Court. So if a law is made and it goes against our Constitution, our hope is that our Supreme Court will overturn that law. And we saw that with the marriage law that was passed that said that marriage can only be between a man and a woman. A lot of states drew up their own laws saying that, but ultimately the Supreme Court ruled that it went against the U.S. Constitution. Statutory law. Statutory law is why we elect our legislators, both in the state level of North Carolina and, of course, in the national level with Congress. And these are people who come up with rules that they believe people should follow. And even on the local level, a lot of our councils can create rules. And I've gone to a lot of council meetings where they've tried to create rules that actually went against constitutions. And luckily, there were some people who stood up and said, you can't keep those people from the library. You can't write these narrowly tailored laws. So statutory law is laws that basically are made by legislators. And I will say that in the Quizlet that you can look at that has these laid out, they do have FCC in there. It's not really the FCC. It's really that Congress came up with a law to create the FCC. So the FCC laws don't fall under statutory law, even though the way this is written, it seems as that's the way. But really, the FCC is who regulates broadcasting, which brings us to administrative law. So administrative law is really agencies that can regulate different industries. And of course, one of the agencies that we're going to look very closely at is the FCC. And the FCC has the ability to pass laws to regulate our industry, broadcast. And we don't get to choose who's on the FCC. The guy who gets to choose is the guy in the White House. And he chooses who's on the FCC, and the Senate confirms them. And of course, no more than 3 can be from the same party. And a lot of times what happens is presidents will not appoint all 5 FCC appointments so that it can be weighed on one political party side or the other. So that brings us to the guy who's got a lot of power, and that's the president, because it's through his executive actions that he decides who's going to be on the Supreme Court, and he decides who is going to be on the FCC and his cabinet. And as we've learned through watching the news as of late, these agencies have a lot of pull and can do a lot of good or harm to our country. Common law is going to be a big part of this class. Common law is also known as discovered law, and it's really because our legislatures, well, they didn't make laws to deal with these problems until it turned out we ended up in court about them. So the common law actually uses past cases to determine whether or not how a court's going to rule. So when it comes to common law, we have basically 4 choices the judge does when they're looking at that past case. They can accept it and say, yep, this is just like what happened 2 years ago, and we're going to rule in favor. Or they can modify it and say, yes, this is very similar to that other case, but we don't believe that it rises to the same economic dispersion or the same emotional problems. They can distinguish it from the current case, and they can say, well, yeah, these cases are similar. However, this case happened 15 years ago, and 15 years ago, we had a lot less expectation of privacy than we do today. Or they can overrule the precedent, which basically means they're going to ignore it. The law of equity is very similar to common law, but the decisions come from a judge. There's no jury. And basically, these happen because it has to be immediately fixed. So, for example, if you go to trial, they have to pick a jury. It's a fact-finding mission, so it usually takes a long time. If anybody's ever watched Law and Order, you know how long it takes to get to trial. But if you're going to lose your business because someone is using your logo, then maybe you need immediate help. And in this case, it might be the law of equity that steps in and helps you. Laws are enforced through courts. The type of law that you've broken, whether it's a federal or state law, determines the court that you're going to be sent to. And when we look at broadcasting or journalism laws, a lot of times they're going to be state, but sometimes they're going to be federal. There are also 2 types of trials that might exist. The trial court, that's the first time you go to court, and you'll find that most of these cases that we look at, it's not the last time they go to court. But the trial court is fact-finding. They've got juries. It lasts a lot longer. The appellate court, they're just looking at the law. So there's no fact-finding in this. It's just a judge. And so the appeal process is supposed to be quicker. So we can't talk about sources of law without giving a little bit more detail on the Supreme Court. So there's 9 justices. One of those justices is the Chief Justice, and it operates like an appellate court, which means there's no jury. It's just the justices, but they are doing some fact-finding. So they're getting more information as they look at these cases. There are 2 ways that you can make it to the Supreme Court. You can make it there through appeal, and you have to go up a pretty big chain to get to the Supreme Court, and they don't accept every case that's knocking at their door, but usually you get there because a law or a judgment has violated the U.S. Constitution, or there's been a legal question that has been raised. And when the Supreme Court meets, they render their decisions in opinions. So not yes or no, but why. And so there's always a court's opinion, which is the majority of the justices. And so sometimes you'll have, I think recently there was a decision involving Trump, and it was a 5-4 decision. However, the majority of the court wrote an opinion, and that was only 3 justices. And then the other 2 justices, although they agreed with the decision of the Supreme Court, they did not agree with the decision why. They went ahead and wrote their own reasoning why they decided. And then the dissenting opinion is usually, sometimes every justice will write a dissenting opinion, unless the 2 or 3 justices believe the same reason why the court's opinion was wrong. So those opinions are important, both the court's opinion, the concurring, and the dissenting, because they still help shape our laws.